Hey everybody, I am Cinnamon Cooney, your Art Sherpa, and today I want to show you how you can paint this amazing splashing up transparent wave with sunset lighting that's all up against the rocks in acrylic, step by step on canvas. And I really mean step by step, fully explained. You're going to see every color mix, you're going to see every technique, things will be explained to you. If you'd like even more help than that, if you check the description below, not only is every material listed out with links, there's also a link to my website where extra resources like a traceable, just in case drawing is something that still makes you very, very uncomfortable or you just don't want to for this particular project, or grid, just in case you want to kind of sketch along with me, but the grid would help you orient that, whichever way you'd want to do that. And guess what else, John?
What?
There's a John to help you on this. I do these videos with the help of my husband, John, and he makes sure that all this information and resources is available to you by making sure the cameras are focused on what we're doing, zooming into techniques, asking me questions that he thinks you guys might have at home. Also, helping me put together mini books.
Mini books.
Right? So we have a whole website where you can go get a mini book that's step by step, that's written out, that is explained. So that if you are a person who likes the video, but you would like something where each step has its materials and its techniques kind of pulled out into their own little space, you can go through this video, which is chapter marked. So you can check the chapters in the description, which gives you an idea of how long it is, what we're doing at what segment. It really helps you manage your expectations. I mean, I don't know what more we could have done except give it to y'all for free, which we did. Now, maybe you're here for Acrylic April and you are continuing on your 30-day journey into how to paint water and landscape. This is a great day for you. You're going to love how the skills from the beginning, from week 1 and week 2, are starting to pull into here, and you're going to see how they're all connected, which I think is wonderful. Man, I'm excited today.
Me too.
So I guess there's nothing for you to do if you're still here, but to get your paint, get your brushes, come back and hit me at the easel right now. And don't forget to subscribe because I teach art for free.
With no sharks.
With no sharks.
No sharks.
It's a shark-free painting. Let's look at the materials for today's really fun wave painting. I have an 8x8 stretched canvas. I have the wish and intention on here that I wrote in with watercolor pencil that you find your own personal perfect wave. Every wave is unique, and I think you're going to really enjoy learning how to paint these really wonderful subject matters. I have cadmium yellow acrylic paint, ultramarine blue, phthalo green, phthalo blue, burnt sienna, Mars black, cadmium red, and titanium white. I'm going to be using assorted brushes for acrylic painting today. Remember, if you need the exact materials, you can check the description below. You can also click the link that takes you to the website where there's a bunch more resources to tell you about materials, alternatives. There's also some really great stuff like a step-by-step mini book, traceables, grids, lots of resources. So check that description below. It can be a little hard to open. Everybody's device is different, isn't it, John?
It is.
So we're going to go to step 1 and paint in a ground. I think you're going to be surprised at how easy, fun, and splashy this is. So to begin this process, I'm going to pick a solid color that I can paint the entire canvas that isn't going to interfere with the wave or the rocks in the background. And I've decided that a deep brown green is actually going to be really good for that. So I'm going to take my water in a bright brush that's about 1 inch wide. This is a number 26 bright, short-handled ruby satin. I'm going to grab a little bit of my phthalo green and burnt sienna and just make a very dark color. I didn't go for the black because I wanted sort of a green undertone since that's so prevalent in this water, and the stones would be building up really well regardless. I may do the upper half of the canvas with a slightly darker value. I'm going to start here this way. We've got a good color to start with. It's very streaky. And that's okay. I'm just painting this around. I'm going to go back and forth. I'm doing this not really even for brush directionality as much as just making sure that the surface is covered in a layer of color. That's all I'm going for here. you can go ahead if you want and add a little black to your brown green mix and kind of delineate the halfway point of the surface or even a little above. This is just to give you maybe even a slightly darker tone where your rocks might be. Before we even sketch that all in, we can raise or lower the rocks as we want to. So there's still room to do that. I'm just at the halfway mark by eye. I'm just making sure that this is sort of dark up here. A little bit darker, a little bit greener. And that's just a nice layer of paint. But it's not that precious. It's not that neat. And it doesn't have to be at this stage. Just your burnt sienna and green on the bottom, and then your burnt sienna green and black on the top. We're going to call this step 1, dry our canvases. When I come back, I'll show you how to lay out the wave. On this subject, this wave has a lot of what's called gesture in art, which means it's got a lot of curve and motion in its shape. It's really one of my favorite types of things that water will do. And this really only happens when a fairly large swell is coming into a shore where there is an uneven or jagged rock formation. Maybe there are rock pillars, different little areas that catch the water at different rates. So some of the water gets pushed back while some of it's able to go forward. Now, I am going to make a bit of a level line. That wouldn't necessarily always be true on this type of seascape because the water could be coming back out, be hitting rocks, be doing different things. It just is true to about here on that seascape. That's all you've got to worry about there. If you're not up for drawing, it's totally okay. You can use the traceable that will be on the website to use that method. Or you can use the gridding method if you're really wanting to capture this. However, I'm not like turning in your wave, and waves come in every shape and size. So like your wave, my wave, all valid waves. I'm going to bring this up here and start to talk about the upsweep of water, which will be coming up here. This is where the energy of the wave is starting to come up, is the toe of the wave, which is the bottom part of the wave, is getting caught on the shore. I grew up in San Diego, so this is something I have some personal experience with and probably a lot of visual information in my mind, which isn't always good because when you have a lot you already know about a subject, sometimes you get really rigid in your thinking about what you want it to be, right? You want it to always be the perfect wave instead of remembering every wave is the wave that it was meant to be, its own perfect wave. I'm going to bring a curve back here because there's this wonderful lacing and curve back. And back here, we've got some great chop because the water's getting caught up in this rock area here. Now I'm going to also bring a line up here to talk about this front fold. And then this fold comes back this way. And we're going to really play with the foam and everything here in the chop. Now coming over here on the side, we've got a bit of it that has done the curl, and the curl will come up and rock over. Right? We're going to come up and rock over. And then on the side here, it will come down. So we've got this great bunch of seafoam. It comes out to a nice big point here. And we're going to talk a lot about how to do seafoam. And there's a lot of ways to do seafoam. And I was actually thinking, John, I should make a video on all the ways to do seafoam. Because there's a lot of way to do seafoam. We're going to do one here, but I mean, definitely watch my video on how to splatter because you could add splatter and everything too, a bunch of different ways. And you might not know that if you've never ever seen that. Now, this wave comes forward here and kind of bends back and comes up. It really is like, this reminds me of a dress in the way that the water is folding and in some sense flowing. And so I'm really excited to kind of get into all that energy of it that's going on. And then we have a great area of seafoam and kind of a rocking back of water this way where it has bounced off of the stone and is coming back this way. So that is why this wave has the shape that it is. These are just the major structure lines you would get into at this stage. Just so you know where you're putting what color and what objects as you paint. Let's come back and we'll start laying in more of the painting. So for this next part, I'm going to use a hog brush to paint in the rough stonework. Hog is a boar bristle, and some things to think about it if you're just coming for this one painting, thinking if I can this woman show me how to paint a wave, which I totally can, and you can totally do. But I just want to tell you about hog brushes. Sometimes when you get them wet, they go out of shape or they get a little misaligned, which is actually some of the benefit and charm of them. Just remember that you want to pull the extra water out of the brush, and also that you can finger reshape hog bristles even if they get a little bit fluffy. And if they're super resistant, a little bit of hot water will really help. Mm-hmm. So if you run into that, they're actually not as fighty backy as they might feel if you're not familiar with them. I'm going to take a little bit of my burnt sienna and my Mars black, and I'm going to just come in and roughly paint in what is this stonework back here, right? This seawall, cliff edge, right? Because that's what it really is. And it's super fun because you can actually put some splash coming up. So I can bring this down a little bit so that I can come back and go splashy up the wall.
Yeah.
And I may come in some, even though I know I'm going to come back out with more splashy water just to make sure that everything is weaving in and out as it should be. I like to go quite dark. Often because these types of formations are volcanic. Some of the best waves happen around islands that are formed by volcanoes. Great thing about that is wonderful waves. Bad thing about that is a really rough, tear up your skin bottom of the beach shore. So all under this wave might not be nice sand. Might be rough rock. You got to be really careful what you do out there in the water. Mm-hmm. I grew up in San Diego, so it was all just nice sand. It still didn't mean that it didn't totally wreck you when you got thrown and drug up underneath the water up the beach.
Now Iceland has some cool sand. They got that black sand beach.
They do. They do. Some places have pink sand beaches. Definitely the mineral composition of things is super impactful. And I'm just trying to make a rough space back here. You know, I might come forward and I might even get a little bit of my ultramarine blue into this mix for this forward stone. Its volcanic composition is maybe slightly different. Mm-hmm. Now this is pretty black on black, so we've got to kind of pull these apart from each other. Mm-hmm. I can actually grab a little white, and as you see, it makes a really fun blue-gray. And I can come in here and start to give my rock a shape. If you've been doing the 30-day painting program with me, Acrylic April, where you're learning how to paint water and landscape, you're kind of familiar with the rock biz by now. And you might be like, rocks, but at least you know what's coming. If you'd like to know more about painting landscape and water, you should check out Acrylic April. It's free and it's really fun to do. And you don't have to do it just in April. Make sure that that's kind of rough. So see, that kind of makes it one little zone. It's a little bit of a difference, but it will really show later on. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a little of my CAD yellow and red, and I'm going to mix them in to my burnt sienna. And this is kind of because there's a sunset going on, and so I can kind of play with that as well. I can exaggerate the red cast in the stone.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to just roughly, I'm not pressing very hard. create some stone marks where the stone is very broken. Up here, perhaps a bit. You can go more brown in some areas. Maybe over here we'll just touch with a little bit. I can use the corner of my brush when I want to have a smaller area that I'm painting. So I don't always necessarily have to switch to a round brush. You don't have to have a hog brush. If you don't have a hog, you can just use a very dry, stiff brush. You know, something that's kind of rough and scruffy. Find your rough and scruffy brushes. And get back into this over here with my ultramarine into my black mix. I haven't really rinsed out. I'm just going to add some gray blue, kind of implying different elements of the rock face. You don't have to worry too much about detail because this is definitely not the focus of our painting. It's just nice to have it considered. I'm just kind of roughly creating some fissures and elements of this particular rock where it's a little breaky. You can come back, and if I rinse out and I grab a round brush, now you could use a synthetic round or a hog round. I'm going to use a hog round just because I want to continue the roughness of it. And I'm going to grab a little black and blue and sort of make sure that I have these dark little fissures. Again, we're going to photograph each of these steps, and you can check those step-by-steps out in the mini book or just on the infographic and the website. Just find what works for you. Let's get a little bit of our green on here and our burn sand and a little green and the smidge of yellow and kind of maybe moss some of this. Because maybe just a little bit of the sea greening happening here, yeah? It's like, oh, could be mineral vein, could be moss. I think it's moss.
These are just loose, brushy strokes.
Loose, brushy strokes, just saying this is the surface of a rock, and I'm painting the surface of the rock very roughly because the rock is rough. You know, you just need to have those things there so that the surface of your seawall kind of looks real. I might bring some black here to clean up that line between those two spaces. Nothing like a little deep dark, right? To continue that implication of perhaps roughness. And also it lets me exaggerate contrast. Play with what things are doing near the water's edge. Really, we're almost done with the rocks. And I bet that's really if you guys have been painting along with me. We've had some rocks this acrylic April, have we not? All right. There we go. Okay. So here are the rocks. This is the background. We're going to go on to the next step and start laying in our water, talking about how light's going to be impacting it and how the depth of the water also impacts its colors and values. And that's the way we're going to create shapes and wave. So things we're going to think about as we paint this wave is light source, which is coming off from the upper left down through the wave. We've also got seafoam that's going to be impacting the color and nature of things. The transparency of the splash back here. There's a lot of factors. The fact that the deepest part of the water will be darkest, right? And then even on this curl coming over here, so there's different things. And also just the energy of the different planes of the water, plus the splashes coming up this rock. Let's start with what's going on in the distance so we can really sort of work the wave around that. And I'm going to take a little of my ultramarine and phthalo green and come back here and start to, maybe even a little more green, start to splash up some of the depth of what's going to be showing through the seafoam. We're going to have seafoam here, but I want to start with kind of a greenish base. And I like the ultramarine to go. So now we can kind of see for sure that there's definitely something in the rock there that's stopping things.
Yeah.
Also over here, some of this water comes here and catches there, and we want to have some depth there. We are coming back over with seafoam, but it's nice to just know that this is dark and deep over here. Now that's going to be making a little rest, as it do. And I can come forward in the front as well.
Put the reflection.
Well, there will be reflections. For sure.
Well, I guess it's not kind of like this water's moving, so it's not really going to reflect
some of it will reflect. Some of the sunset will be reflected. It'll come in through some of the spaces, maybe on some of the surface. We might put some on the rocks. Yeah. We're going to find a place to make that sort of fun. But right now we're like, how can I capture some of the deeper, more meaningful values of this? I'm using my number 6 round just because it was in my hand. You could use any brush that you're comfortable with to paint in these areas. You just want something that gives you a clean line and lets you feel fairly confident in what you're doing. You can also start to pull up here in the wave, perhaps, a little depth. Yeah, we're going to be playful a few places. We're definitely going to put in some reflection, but we need to have some depth so that the shape of it is really evident. Get a little more into my ultramarine. Another surprising color sometimes that I do in waves, not in this one, would be dioxazine purple. It could be nice, just depends on where you are in the world going on. I curl that brush stroke over.
I like how the wave curves and the brushstroke helps make that.
The brushstroke on this really does. There's a bunch of tools and brushstrokes we don't get into. We'll get in if you guys do a really great job. No. It's just like, if you guys do a good job. But at the end of Acrylic April, for those of you that went through the program, I'm going to put up some really great oceanscapes that are maybe like beyond what we would normally do on the channel. And I'll show you some more tools and tips and tricks to just continue to level these art skills. I'm going to add a little bit of this dark value maybe here. And then a little bit of that dark value maybe here. If this is a really fun wave to paint, if you go to Acrylic April 2020, day 30, there is a very similar wave crashing up on the ship that I really, really am very fond of. All right. Look at that go. So we put that in. This is starting to dry back here now. and get deep. And I'm going to take a little of my ultramarine blue and some of my burnt sienna because they kind of make a gray. And start to think about the seafoam.
The seafoam. This
Now,
is where
I'm going to do this. I'm going to flick the brush forward.
that's a very important flick.
It is. I'm on the toe and I flick, and that gives me the rough edge. I could do this with a fan. I could do this with lots of things. But this is what's going to help me get that shape that I'm looking for. I don't want my brush to be too wet. Right? I can even kind of sometimes get it into this, like, and really play with the color there. And we know this is really foamy back here. Little bits of the ocean color will come out, but it's super foamy back here.
And foam is important because that's where the unicorns are born.
Yes, they are born there. I can grab a little bit of my deep sea color and kind of come in and make sure that I'm blending that through here, play with that. And again, it's fairly rough out here because, well, the water would be a moving. We've got to figure out a way to make sure that we're talking about that moving out there. Now up front, it's much more considered. I'm going to get a little bit of my burnt sienna over to my ultramarine blue. Make kind of a seafoamy gray. And I may need to switch to a tighter brush if my brush were flaring out. So see how these little hairs flare out? If you're having that happen.
Makes it kind of floofy.
Yeah. If you're having a brush, you want to rinse it out and you twirl and dry it off.
Oh, let me look at that.
And then you want to just make sure you've twirled it kind of closed.
Twirl.
Twirl, and you can always load on your toe. If it's giving you real grief and you can't get it reshaped, then you switch over to either cat's tongue or a round. I'm going to use a number 4 round for this part here. Just so that I can show you guys making that. Now I am going to move my table a little bit towards the left. I turn it towards the left, and that's just so that I can get control of the direction of my brush stroke, because you'll have a directionality where you have the most strength, most confidence in those skills. And it's okay to move your surface to make you more comfortable. Now, if you ever have trouble orienting with the table movement, we have a mini book where everything is written out and each step has a step photograph and a written description, lets you know what materials and colors were used and some of the techniques. And if you have that in accompaniment with this, that can really, really help you stay oriented. Right now, this is just a very rough painting of seafoam. I like to make little areas that are open. Seafoam does a lot of stuff. Oh, it's very frothy.
It's a
The
favorite
sea
color.
is latte.
It's many people's favorite color.
Well, seafoam green is.
You know, I have to say, that floofy seafoam that looks like, oh, it's so nice like coffee. It does not taste or smell like coffee.
It does not taste or smell like coffee. And you shouldn't drink ocean water.
No.
Don't drink the ocean. It's not safe.
The ocean has a natural way of saying, humans don't come in here.
It's so weird about water. You know, he's so funny. He's so scared of sharks that I'm like, yeah, but it's red tide you got to worry about.
It's not a fear. It's a practical concern. You know, you're thinking sharks, not a problem, until you see a 14-foot white breach 100 yards off the 101. And you're like, huh, surfers, just like a stone's throw up or down from here. And it's just that they changed their feeding patterns.
That's John's belief. It's not that we've ever even been in California where that has ever happened.
No, no, I see it on the YouTubes, and then I go,
He watches
proof, I'm
YouTube.
correct. Do not go in the oceans.
He watches YouTube and then it's like, I'm done with the ocean.
Oh well, no, I used to live in Galveston. This is how I got done with it. You tell them about the ocean, I'll tell them why I'm done with sharks.
Okay. I don't know. I feel like this should all be you. I feel like when it comes to your shark issues, I should just sit back and listen.
No, but you're telling what you're doing. Your highlights here.
So I'm just making random little irregular marks around here, trying to create open ellipses where we begin this basic shape of the seafoam. Let's call this a step. Get this accidental drip that I did on my canvas. And then we'll come back and we'll start to add highlights and more stuff as we go. Like sometimes with this stuff, it's like you just want to keep building and building and building in the layers. So we're going to call this step. Step.
Step.
Step. Let's come back and refine some of this information back here, some of this foam information. We're going to use a brighter color, not a pure white, because this is still fairly back in the shadow of the cliff face here. But we do want to have elements of white, of lighter splashing. This is really important when you're trying to express that something is foamy.
Oh, it's always the highlights that add motion to it.
It really is. And we just want to put a little bit in so that we can see it happening. Just again, touching little bits of foam in areas that might possibly be a little more in detail. You don't have to be perfect. It's about that general energy and the motion of the water. Get a little more blue in your water if you need to, like that's a little bit bright. You still want it to be bright, but not competing against the forward wave. Just making rough chop here in the distance. And it's fun to make rough chop. I feel like it is. Little brush engages and releases. That's what's happening here. My brush is engaging and releasing. I'm not even using a splattering tool, which I could use if I wanted to add little splatters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just tapping my brush in and out, letting it make tiny little droplet kind of marks, and just kind of keeping it random. And I can just catch little highlights when I'm ready to.
Mm-hmm.
And go a little bit more into give some shading to my foam here. Even create splashes and more motion. There's this almost lacing effect, and that's what you're trying to kind of capture or think about while you're doing this.
Mm-hmm. And that's that not patterned pattern of water.
It's that non-pattern pattern of water.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of
Mm-hmm.
the sharks, they got patterns on the sharks that make them invisible because of the stuff.
You know, you're so concerned about sharks, I would almost think you were a seal.
You know, I can relate.
Just don't be a seal.
Just lay on the beach. Don't go in the ocean. But you got those flippers and you got to go in for a swim. It compels. But anyway.
I mean, I think for the seals, it's their environment, so they're kind of stuck with the sharks. I think you find it very optional. I'm adding these highlights, and I'm just trying to kind of capture some of the motion of the water here.
See, my fear is legit. I came from swimming in Galveston, and then
you should have been just flat out afraid of swimming in Galveston.
That's well, I am now.
But sharks, whatever, swimming in the water of Galveston. That's the fear.
Tar aside.
So we just want to come through here and pick out areas of the foam that we don't make purely white, but we do definitely find the highlights on. Just coming through. It's actually pretty relaxing to do, you know, and you're just trying to find spots. It's important to make sure that, you know, maybe between the bigger openings that sometimes you have them broken up with maybe a smaller little bit of seafoam, because it does tend to find its like way into a bunch of places.
It's true, it does. The highlights. I see them.
Seafoam. So very, very shaded. Really fun to do pieces like this. They're like a painting that is like, obviously we all know it's a wave, but it's also a bit of an abstract because of their nature, which I really like about them. So if you find you like painting waves, you may actually find that you have an affinity for painting abstract. I like to make sure that some of the seafoam will come in and off the edge of my canvas, just so that it feels like the world is complete and has entrances and exits that I don't necessarily see in my viewing window. All right. So that's a little bit of that seafoam. I think we can come back and start working on some wave detail. We're going to keep going into our wave structure and playing and having fun. I'm going to get back into my number 6 hog round and keep painting in some of the values of the wave. Remember that the most of the light is going to come through the water is thinnest, and then it's going to be darkest where it's fullest. So that's always a fun thing to play with. I'm going to take my phthalo green and phthalo blue together. I like to make sort of this turquoise value. And I'm going to begin to kind of really paint it in. Now, it's important to, as you're doing the brush stroke, to have a directionality that allows the kind of curve of the wave to sort of be shaped. See how I'm doing? And that will also kind of inform what's going on. So we can create some real pretty effects. Like right here, could be a little bit thinner. Where it lifts up. I also find that there's a couple spots kind of coming over the curl that have a tendency to get a little more light through them. And it's just really this fun flow of painting the different colors. That's a lot of fun to do. The ocean colors are super duper fun,
Hmm.
in my opinion.
I like them.
Now, where the water is deep, it's dark, but then we'll also have some reflections we're going to play with and some seafoam. So keep that in mind. We paint the structure,
Mm-hmm.
but then we may have to paint those artifacts also on the way.
Oh, yeah.
So you'll see me add a little more white where I'm going to brush that down. I really like this. This is one that I was like just personally looking forward to doing. Sometimes I want to add a lot more white and even perhaps some yellow,
Hmm.
kind of implying just a very transparent kind of green. Try to control the water that gets on my hog brush so that it doesn't get too wet. Came back with a little more phthalo blue. So you can see I really play with that, but it doesn't take much for that to start to become something pretty exciting on the canvas in my mind. A little more yellow. Maybe darken it a bit as we come to the back. Creating some little form in here. I'm going to get again my phthalo blue, and I'm going to turn this just so I have a good angle because I've got to get the sloping of the wave.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important thing to get because the sloping of the wave changes based on how steep it is. I also have some interesting water bits that will kind of flare out here,
Mm-hmm.
where the wave will also have some personality happening out this way. Again, it's like a ruffled skirt for ballroom dance. It's super interesting that way. And you can see the shape is just coming in. Kind of bring some like lighter. Little ultramarine and the blue. We're just playing with these marine colors. And that just makes this type of landscape so super beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know you feel like it's riddled with sharks, but you have to admit it's gorgeous
It is pretty.
for being riddled with sharks.
Mm-hmm.
Bring some yellow here. This will really kind of speak to the light could be showing. through.
You know they find shark teeth everywhere.
You find shark teeth everywhere. Keep
Yep.
curling this. What?
They think they're just swimming around with teeth falling out of their head.
Well, I think that probably is true because their teeth grow all the time. They're like,
See, you're not helping this. I'm not going to go in there now.
well, you weren't going to go in before, so I haven't made it worse.
You just,
I feel like that you just need to talk to a marine biologist is what's going on with you.
and you know what they're going to say?
They're going to say that sharks don't actually eat that much and are very unlikely to attack you, that they're looking for a seal and you are not a seal. They're going to give you some interesting statistical numbers about how driving your car is significantly more dangerous than being attacked by a shark. And considering how many times, like in all seriousness, you've been hit as a pedestrian, you should be very afraid of the road, but you've never been attacked by a shark. Just saying.
So I don't
I
know.
think you may be afraid of the wrong stuff.
I think I got brushed with a shark.
I don't think you were brushed with a shark. I think you
Let's-
thought you were brushed with a shark and panicked, and you were like, it was a shark, and you just like,
Well, so this is what I think so. Is
I'm going to add a little highlight through here, just kind of continuing to try to build this up. I think that that's a good place to stop because we're really going to start adding some different colors and different things around. And it's I want to break this part of it down so you can really see how it's constructed. This is like, ooh, the wave. We got a couple waves to do. So you're going to be all good about this by the end of our aquatic journey. Plus, we just did the little wave in the boat. If you're doing Acrylic April with us, you did the wave in the boat. And remember, if this is at all hard, download the mini book. So from where we're at, we're going to continue to add some detail and some thoughtfulness to the waves. They're so colorful and fun to do. I really enjoy it.
mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to come into my number 4 round just because it gives me a little more control and begin to kind of detail in some of the highlights and values in the water, which can still be my phthalo green, phthalo blue, and even sometimes a little bit of the cad yellow to take it into that aquatic green, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very light with my white. Just these different colors, just trying to come in here and make sure that it's as transparency as we could make it. Adding a little more yellow, just detailing the thin parts of the waves is what we're doing. The thin parts of the waves have quite a lot going on in them.
Now, I really like the transparency on the beach that you did in the boat one.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
where it was the seafoam went through.
Yeah, and you can see the beach underneath with the little shadowy waves and then the seafoam.
So these aren't quite as
that's all.
transparent as that. Ocean waves tend to not, they can get that thin, but generally this backsplash won't run that thin, but you will see light through it. And so we can play with that concept that there's light coming through these that we, the viewer, then can see. Even on this forward wave, I can bring a darker value here. And it's so wild how it's curled here. Just honestly, like that's so cool.
Uh-huh.
The way that's curled right there. And I may come in even with some ultramarine blue and make sure that that has a little bit of definition. And the trick here is I have to splash everything. You've got to splash the splashes. And because I've got to add the splashes, I've got to make room for these waves to have a good splash and still be identifiable as what they are. So that's what I'm kind of working on here is the shape before the splash, as you would go. And then the back of the wave, you know, is such an interesting thing because it can have seafoam coming up of it. It doesn't always, but it can. It can also have reflections. You've really got to think of these creatures as shaped objects
Mm-hmm.
into the space. And then it's interesting that I call them creatures because it's very telling of where I grew up, actually. To see the ocean as a very living being.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think when you do grow up next to the coast, you kind of start to see the ocean in that way of being alive. And I think that's why I love ocean art. And you don't ever paint the same wave twice.
Hmm.
Kind of like that same sunset. You never paint the same sunset twice.
Never surf the same wave.
You can't surf the same wave twice. It's not possible.
Like,
You know that, right?
She get all serious and philosophical.
Well, I mean, you just can't. You just can't. There will always be another wave. Sure. There will always be another wave. But that wave will never come again. So it's a concept of abundance and then also of the fact that things are finite
Mm-hmm.
and have scarcity in some ways. Right? There's always another set of waves, but the weather conditions will never be the same. Or, and I'm sure there's somebody who's like a fractal chaos scientist who's like, no, every so often, we only have so many weather conditions and we only have so many waves. But it feels like I don't know the math of that. I'm going to be real honest, but if in my experience, it has felt infinite
Mm-hmm.
and beyond varied. I'm adding a highlight using my phthalo green and phthalo blue and titanium white, kind of helping determine the flow over of the wave. Just brushing that over. Trying to really capture that right there. He's my favorite, and I may come back with some green right here at this edge.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I do feel like every wave is its own unique feature. Each beach moment, every foggy day, just never know what you'll find there. I, wish I lived closer to water sometimes. Sometimes.
Well, we're
know
not
that
that
that's a
far.
good idea anymore.
To be honest, we're not that far from the water.
No, we have. That's one of the things that was attractive to me was that there was close by water.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I was looking at it because I have to do some other driving.
Mm-hmm.
We're really close to the shore. Like, we could just go right out to the Jersey Shore, and there'd be a whole bunch of things.
I know, that's wild, right? So I'm highlighting this upper edge of the wave. I'm creating reflections here. I definitely want to start to put in some of that on the front face. The front face, I maybe start with a little yellow and white, and it's absolutely true that there's seafoam and things, but we also want to make sure that we've got some reflection. If the wave is facing a bright source of light,
Mm-hmm.
that's what's going to go on. So I am grabbing my yellow. It's okay if it gets a little green in it. I am kind of keeping my brush from the middle of the belly to the toe, a little more horizontal to the surface, and this is letting me dry brush. A couple of reasons I'm showing you this. I get written questions all the time. Do I have to have that brush? What other brush can I use? Here's my question. Here's my answer, and I'm going to make a video about this because it's so my answer. Every brush or any brush or none of the brushes, because you've got to take your brushes out and you're going to have to practice all the techniques with all your brushes on a practice canvas and determine what brushes in your brush bucket do a good dry brush and how can you make the brushes that you have do a good dry brush, right? Like, there isn't really just a pat answer to what other brush is there, right? Because you could do it with your finger. It's a tough question to find an answer to. And then continue to pull it up. I'm always going to answer it, but the best thing that you can do as a consumer is get into your tool bucket and go, well, I need to be able to dry brush and blend and work wet into wet and do these different techniques and play with the tools that you have, right? And play with the paint that you have and figure out how your tool sets and your paint will do it, because then you don't have to just keep buying thing after thing after thing trying to solve an art problem. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because I see that happening to everybody's, like having to buy thing after thing after thing to solve an art problem. Whereas if you just make the color chart and practice with the tools, then you know what you have, what it will do. And if there is a hole in your tool set, then you can tactically, is that correct? Tactically fill it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I do see like some teachers, not all teachers, but some teachers will just create a definitive response that they know will work, right? Just because from their experience, and say, just buy this. And I get how that's an attractive answer because it does immediately solve the student's problem. But if you can teach them how to figure out what works through this experiential method, the method of experimentation and practice, then they'll never be tool minus again. They'll never be without a tool again. So sort of teach a man to fish kind of thinking. Isn't that wonderful right there?
It really is.
I likes it. I likes it very much. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a little yellow. This is going to be real fun. Just right here. This is the sunset we're going to talk about without ever showing the sunset. Kind of dry brushing there. You can kind of start to see that. And then I'm going to take my cad yellow and a bit of my cad red. And I'm just putting a bit of this there so that we can imply that it's shining through. Just a little bit of it. It's a big impact. That color, because of the green, is a big impact. And then the other thing, while I have that color, I want to take a little of my cad red. And again, I put a lot of my cad red out, which is why I like these wet palettes, so I'm not wasting my paint. I can come to the top of my rock, perhaps. And add some maybe sunset catching on some of the surfaces here. Does that make sense? Be playful a bit here. Dabbing some of that light. We had kind of talked about it over here, but we can talk about it a bit there. And when you add that glow, you for sure get a glow. So when I'm painting a wave, I'm really capturing time. I'm capturing a second. I'm like putting a little bit of universal energy into a bottle. That's sort of exciting. It's one of the few ways that we can hit that pause button in our lives. The pause button is very hard to find sometimes. Everything goes so quickly. How do you find that pause button? There we go.
Wow.
Isn't that stunning?
It really is.
So pretty. All right, let's call this a step because that was a lot to take in conceptually
All
and
right.
kind of maybe even emotionally, and come back and start adding some foam and some other splashy details. So, very much like the wave and everything else that's in our world, it's going to be about getting values and getting those different little elements. I'm going to start with my hog bristle brush. This is my number 6 round. And I'm going to grab my ultramarine blue and my titanium white, a smidge of my burnt umber, because that first little bit of froth that we have,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tap up and down. My brush is dry. I could do this with a sponge. I could do this with my Princeton round blender. Again, it's really just about understanding your brushes when you're doing stuff like this to go, oh, I've got 6 brushes that will do this technique for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that on the hog brush, as it gets wet, it will struggle a little bit to do this technique because it gets softer. So what do I got to know? I got to know how to, wipe out the brush and dry things as they go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make sure that there's a arcing little spray. Now, as I get this wet to improve flow, I've got to wipe off that extra water or I will lose the stamping technique. See how it's already gotten.
Yeah. There were some
So you saw
questions
me
there.
like stab my brush up and down going, that's how I'm getting it to stop being clumped. There were some questions?
Yeah, about and I'd read these earlier. There were a lot of folks that were struggling with, despite not putting a lot of paint on the brush, they continued to overload it. And I don't think they were wiping the brush off.
Well, and you've got to. There's one of the reasons we do such a big full palette is so you can see the color mixes for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but also so that you see me do stuff like these weird little moments. Right? That's what the experience is about. Oh, look at me go stamp it with my brush. I'm going to come around here and say, tap a little lighter, and then maybe towards this edge a little heavier,
Mm-hmm.
and come back. That's a distant wave. So you definitely want to get to know your tool, because otherwise, how do you know that this fixes the brush? And it's this brush. If I got a different hog brush, like I got the Pro Stroke by Creative Mark, which is a really good hog brush, or the Simply Simmons chunking interlocked hog, or the Raphael hog, each of them will be a little different in temperament. I was just answering a question today where somebody had gotten golden quinacridone magenta, and they were having a particular color mixing problem. And I had to be like, what's your yellow? What's your this? What's your that? Every single change in brand, every single change in that can kind of alter your experience. So you will constantly be getting to know your tools. A little bit more chill right there, and then every once in a while I might kind of stroke back because sometimes the seafoam blows back. As a
Mm.
thing to keep in mind that the seafoam might blow back on top of splashback. Little bit of water, tapping it out. And backward flick. Very important little energy to that wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this is going to be busy business. Just going to say right now, it's a busy business down here where the wave is actually crashing. I'm just tapping, stippling up and down. I have a splatter tool, and it's a great tool to use at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful tool to use at this stage. And, if you want to see how to use different splattering techniques to create little dynamic particulates, I absolutely have a video about that. I'm just trying to show you if you weren't splattering today,
Right.
how you could get this done. And it's important that my foam has these values because when I go to shade it, and I will go to shade it, I can give it dimensionality. Coming up and down, I'm stamping up and down. I've got a stencil brush that will do a similar thing to this.
Mm-hmm.
The right stencil will do this. The sea sponge will absolutely do a great version of this. Wonderful version of this. I'm going to rinse out and really take my towel and work the moisture out of this brush because since I've started the technique with this brush, I kind of am inclined to want to finish the technique with the brush. But
That
I
makes
know
sense.
that,
Yeah.
huh?
So that makes sense.
Yeah, but I know that hog bristles will tend to want to get soft as they get wet, so I've got to really work that moisture out so I don't lose all of my technique that I have with the brush. This is lighter. It's not completely white,
Mm-hmm.
but it's lighter. And it won't be every part of that foam. That'll be another thing to resist is highlighting every bit of the foam. Sometimes when you're new to painting and you've got a technique, you just do the technique solid across the canvas.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, all the leaves this way or all the things. And this is one of those good programs. It's like kind of good to break up that inclination that you might have. To want to make very solid, consistent moments. And I might be very gentle and just capture an edge. See how that creates dimensionality in the water? This is
Mm-hmm.
a really pretty wave.
It really is.
Just love paint this kind of wave all the time. I think I painted a wave almost exactly like this on my very first daily painting challenge that I gave myself back when I was like, I have no style and I'm too commercial and I need to get my own unique voice or whatever I was on about at the time. But I was on about something and I felt like if I painted every day,
Mm-hmm.
it would help me. And guess what? It totally did, which is when I became a fan of the idea of you paint every day, it will help you find yourself. And I was commercial. And just commercial just means that, I had a really lovely sense of graphic space and could make stuff that would be broadly appealing to large amounts of people, but it wouldn't necessarily be high art. Of course, it pays the bills. So sometimes eating is really important in the world. All right, just pop a little bit of that highlighted there. I love doing those things where it's just like captures a little bit and it creates so much space. And you will see me kind of dance around and that's a little hard on John, but my art brain just makes me do it. I can't. I'm gonna come here next.
Right.
I'm gonna be well behaved and come there next. So it's not my whitest white, but it's pretty bright. And much like a cloud, I've got to find the shapes. Oh, look at that. I got a water drop on my
Oh.
canvas. Ah,
Made more water.
but not the kind I wanted. I just came back with my blue and white and repaired it right there. You see me do that? I just came back and repaired it. That's how I repaired it. I wiped it off
Mm-hmm.
and came back and stippled it. I'll wipe out my brush with a towel and come back into my lighter seafoam and continue on about my seafoam business. Continuing on about my seafoam business. So in my initial stipple, because I kind of tried to do rows and shapes and keep it irregular,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of an implication of cloud form or mist form in this particular case was created. And that's going to allow me to find those moments again here and define those shapes within this mist moment. I may need to rinse my brush out and then dry it off again. And it's important to realize that your mist has real form. Like down here, down low, if I come back in with my blue underneath, I'm not going to be sorry that I did. It just helps inform that. So if you've got to do that to get good mist, value, darks and shadows and things, do that. That's how the little foam takes shape. We don't have to paint every single droplet of water. We paint the light and darks that these droplets accumulate together. That's what we're doing. I like doing that. So pretty. Then come back through with even more light color.
Mm-hmm.
And I can even get a smidge of my yellow into it. That's my white and maybe a smidge of my yellow.
I like the flying wave.
You can capture a little bit of light a few places on your mist. As if this sunset also might be touching what you see. This is what makes your world feel authentic. That's what takes your painting to that next space.
Mm-hmm. You can really see the.
I mean, like, I get that this is like a painting party at home. I do, because we're going through step by step. I explain the layers, I do all that. But let's be honest, we're really like bringing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're really doing it. So if you came to this maybe from like having gone to a painting party or just discovered online that you like to paint and you're sitting here painting this wave with me, pat yourself on the back because you like jumped in the deep end of the ocean and decided that you're going to come swim and you're learning stuff. I often bless this industry, the painting party industry, because it introduced so many people to the idea that they could paint. And that is a gift that the world needed right now. Get that sunlight, capture that foam. And that let me get a hold of you guys
Mm-hmm.
so that you could come have this moment here. Painting little golden lit foams. And they are little golden lit foams. How the water captures light. And then we capture the water doing that, and it's just suddenly so dimensional. Now you understand what I mean about like the wave is alive. The wave is alive, my friend. Wave is alive. And you're going to paint that life into it. Give it its moment. And its life may be brief, but is no less meaningful. And by capturing it in this second, in this way, what have you done? You've made it
Mm-hmm. Cap-
forever now.
Captured some of that spray.
We
Ugh.
did, didn't
Oh.
we? Captured just a little bit of it. There we go. A little bit off that water. Woo!
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're going to come back and put in kind of some last resolution sort of things with the foam, with this water here, shading and all that. And I think we're coming to like this wave's conclusion at the shore.
All right.
So we have a lot going on here, but we can have an opportunity to continue to pull things together. I'm going to get into my number 4 round and also my hog brush. And I want to create a couple of things. I want to brighten and strengthen the reflection to the front face of this wave. I want to pull some reflection through the foam. I'm going to grab my yellow and a little bit of my white and just very gently dry brush with my number 6 round, leaving lots of my green really still showing, but I just want to make this wave very shiny at the front. It kind of will put all the golden light we put into the seafoam into context. This is working because I'm coming on the wave very gently. Leaving lots of shadow, but again, this is quite a bright light, so I don't want to kind of lose that space there because it puts that into context and also explains why these are sort of in different zones a little bit. But that being said, I still have to kind of pull all these together. So let's get a little bit of our kind of yellow green. And come a few places and create some of these reflections, perhaps through some of the seafoam. Not everywhere. But it's good to make sure that what you have in your painting, the lighting that you represent, this is really important. Like if you're in video games and you're making environments, your lighting has to be the same throughout the environment. You can't have like distinctly separate lighting scenarios. We used to have a video game company way back when John and I were newly together, and that was an interesting thing to see. Was the level designers
Mm-hmm.
working with the graphic designers for the levels, working with this issue of lighting and creating, these architectural elements that were lit correctly for the lighting you were implying in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was something you would talk with people about quite a lot.
Oh yeah, we talked a lot about lighting. It's really what brings scenes together.
It can totally bring a scene together, and just putting a little bit of this in that seafoam does make a huge difference. And then even if I come here and I get a highlight in my seafoam, also highlighting what's going on in this seafoam here. Because seafoam is very formy, this form. But if you've got like nighttime lighting, you don't want the chair lit like it's noon. Right? Unless you have some explanation of a spotlight on it,
Mm-hmm.
it should be lit like it's at night. If you've got a wave at sunset or dusk going on, right, and you've lit it like that, then you need to make sure that the things around it, like the cliffs and all that, are lit like it is what you're saying it is. And you can see I bring that lighting off the surface a bit. Now it does get darker back here, and that's okay. And the reason why that's okay is because the cliffs and the wave itself are impacting what light can get where. So I can pick up little bits of highlight, but it is something to be aware of that maybe, in the back or towards the back, it's just a little different. Maybe not as bright as up front. Brighter.
Mm-hmm.
Moving that brush through. This lacing effect, and if you start to think of it a bit as lace, it may help you paint the seafoam. These are little ovals and ellipses and odd little amoeba shapes that you're trying to speak to. A little yellow and white. You can even come in and be like, some of this can maybe not quite so bright, but perhaps a little bit of sunlight could be hitting here. See how we're making the sunlight hit a little bit here?
Mm-hmm.
Capture a little bit in this space. Now play with it a bit. So now I've got a bright pop of light. That's a pretty dynamic little bit of seafoam. The only thing that could really pull it together maybe a little bit more is if I took my phthalo green and my ultramarine blue, and I very carefully kind of came under my wave. And made sure, I'm going to tip this a little bit just so that I have a nice angle. And make sure there's a little shadow under there.
Mm-hmm.
I can push out with my finger to kind of blend it. I'm not lining it, it's not an outline. And I may come back with my brush a bit to tuck it in. But you do want a bit of a shadow under your wave. I'm kind of just using a thin little glaze of water and paint. To create that concept. And if I've got to go back, which I do with a little bit of my other, with my number 6 round, coming back, kind of doing the just making sure that that doesn't look like I white lined it or something. There you go. You just break up that a bit. Guess what?
What?
We painted it.
It looks so nice and shark free.
This is a shark free beach.
This.
No seals.
We're just gonna. They have a giant net around it.
Okay, if that makes you feel better, I will let you have that.
There's holes in the net.
If it makes whatever makes you feel better about the sharks.
Not going in.
Not going in is what makes John feel better about the shark. So funny and ridiculous. All right, so I do want to sign it. I'm going to come here and I will get some of my white. If I'm going to sign in that far corner, I don't want to really have so bright of a color that my signature is going to show. This is a number one kind of, I want my signature to show, but I don't want it to be the whole painting.
It's a perfect little signature.
I don't know. like hard on my own signature. I don't know.
I like it. It's a good signature.
I want it to kind of hide there though. A bit, like feel like it goes in that space.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the nice things that I have on my paintings is that we don't have to like really prove my signatures are mine because it's like they're film. The whole thing is film. Like, if anybody ever cared to verify that my art was my art,
Yep.
it's the easiest provenance to prove.
It really is.
You could just get a computer to probably do it because it could like watch the film and then watch the and it would be like it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
Weird thoughts that I have.
I like it. This turned out to be a great one and shark free. I'm so happy.
Well, and hopefully by this, like whether you maybe you came in for just this wave painting, and I hope you took advantage of the resources and you found our website and you found your mini book and you found your traceable and all the extra stuff that we have, and then discovered we have like 1,500 free art videos, and then hit the subscribe button because you thought that was so fantastic that you were like, I gotta do all of them. You know, if you came in for that, I hope you had a great time. If you're here for Acrylic April and you're doing this program about water and landscape, you know, and you're here at this stage, I'm hoping really at this part of the journey that you're starting to see like, oh, these principles that we talked about in week 1 apply as we go. And these techniques that we learned in week 2 are relevant as we go. And so that these things really do kind of connect together so that by the end, you're kind of like, I can really face anything in water. Landscape and water, I understand. I understand why it is what it is, how it gets painted, the way that it gets painted, and how many ways that I can do that. If you weren't aware that this was a 30-day painting program, which I maybe skipped to the end of the painting and you missed me explaining it earlier, you should go check that out as well on the website, Acrylic April 2021, A Story of Water.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, thank you for your time. I really appreciate the effort you guys put into your paintings. Please show me your version. Come into the Facebook group, share on Twitter, share on Instagram. John's looking at me and he's waving at you, which you can't see. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. And I want to see you at an easel really soon. Bye-bye.